Good evening, creatures of the night. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. And remember, if you haven't picked up your own copy of my new novel, Werewolf Ranch, the link is in the description below. Have a good night, and don't miss your chance to scream. After quite a rough patch, I ended up in a rickety cabin out in the Ozarks. That's what happens when you lose your job, can't keep up with the mortgage payments, and your house goes into foreclosure. It was honestly horrible. My wife had passed away 2 years before, and every day since felt like fighting upstream. And eventually, I just ran out of steam. After the bank took my home in 2014, I called in a favor from an old friend who owned a cabin in Arkansas near the edge of the woods. He said I could rent it for next to nothing, at least until I got back on my feet. I assumed it would be better than sleeping in my truck, so I packed up what little I had left and made the move. If you've never been to the Ozarks, they're beautiful. They're peaceful, but they can also make you feel like you're living in a different world. The cabin itself was off a narrow gravel road, lined by tall trees that seemed to lean in like they were guarding some secret of their own. The place was small and rundown, no TV, no internet, and the porch tilted a bit to the right. The nights there were pitch black, and the nearest neighbors were about half a mile up the road. I told myself the quiet would help me think. It would help me process the loss of my wife, and hopefully figure out my next steps. My first few weeks were uneventful enough. I spent most days sending out resumes from the local library. It was about an hour drive away though, and I spent my evenings tinkering around the cabin, trying to fix leaky pipes or shore up creaky floorboards. I kept to myself really. I'd hear plenty of wildlife at night, owls and foxes and possums rummaging through the garbage, but nothing that particularly freaked me out. Actually, I almost liked it. The sense of living with nature all around me, it never made me feel too alone. Then, around the third week, I started to notice odd things. One evening, I heard snuffling sounds right outside my bedroom window. It was like something with a short snout sniffing at the wall. This was a very distinct noise, wet and heavy breathing. At the time, I assumed it was a black bear, except I'd lived in Arkansas long enough to know how normal bears sound. This wasn't it. This wasn't what a bear should sound like. You see, bears have deeper, more resonant kind of huffs. But this was sharper, with occasional grunts or squeals mixed in. I remember turning to my bedside lamp and turning it off so I could look out the window without a glare, but it was too dark to see a thing. When I opened the window to try and shine a flashlight, the sound abruptly stopped, like whatever's out there decided to run off. A couple of nights later, I found fresh prints in the dirt by the porch. They were large enough to actually make me nervous, but not quite as big as your typical bear paw might be. And what threw me off was the shape. The toes were very long, and there seemed to be more of a curved arc. This made my hair stand on end. Could have been some sick or mangy bear, sure, but something about those prints was just wrong. That same night, I found claw marks along the side of the cabin near the kitchen window. They were arranged horizontally, as if something had reared up on its hind legs and raked long, curved claws across the wood. It didn't look like the usual bear scratch to me. I began to form a sort of legend in my head, that some local variation of a black bear or some other critter was living out here alongside me, and whether or not it was peaceful remained to be seen. I'm no zoologist, though. Every passing day brought more unsettling evidence, though, it seemed. Something unusual was nosing around. That was clear to me. One morning, I woke up to find the trash bin flipped over, the lid half chewed, and there were these strange grayish hairs caught in the hinge. The fur was sparse, thin, almost patchy, and the strands themselves were coarse. It looked more like a boar's bristles than a bear's fur, even though they were too long to be from a boar. It was perplexing. But as the weeks went on, the nightly visits became more frequent. At least 3 or 4 times a week, I'd hear huffling or shuffling footsteps just beyond the porch. Occasionally, I would catch sight of a broad, hunched form loping between the trees, if there was any moonlight to show it. I never got a crystal clear view, though, but from the glimpses I managed, I saw it had a heavy frame, a blunt snout, and patchy fur that looked like it had suffered from some disease. Seriously, it gave me the creeps. I tried to tell myself it was just a black bear, a diseased black bear, but deep down, I didn't think it was that simple. One night, I heard a deep, ragged grunting near the back door. It sounded frustrated, like it was trying to get inside but couldn't figure it out. I grabbed my baseball bat, as I didn't have a gun at the time, and tiptoed to the door. There was this moment when the two of us, whatever was outside and me inside, just stood there. I could feel it out there through the thin wood. I could hear a low, snuffling breath. My heart was pacing so loud I was sure that whatever was out there could hear it. Then, just like before, it moved on, leaving me there with beads of sweat dripping down my face. Things escalated a bit when it started to claw at the windows at night, though. I'd wake up to the sounds of nails scraping glass. It made me think it was trying to find a way in and was testing places. Once, whatever it was left smears on the window. This greasy, foul-smelling residue that took me forever to clean up. I began to dread sundown out there. Lighting candles around the cabin more for comfort than actual illumination. Like a bit more light would help keep that thing at bay. And honestly, I still had no idea what it was that I was facing. When it wasn't skulking around, I was dealing with my own misery. Grief for my wife, the stress of being broke and nearly homeless, the uncertainty of my future. The cabin felt like a prison sometimes, but I stayed because it was cheap, and I didn't really have any other options. My friend said I was welcome to crash there indefinitely, and pride wouldn't let me go begging for family members for a spare couch. So I stuck it out. I was just hoping that that creature would lose interest. But then came the worst night. The night I think it nearly ended me. It was late March by then, a bit warmer, and the woods around the cabin smelled like wet leaves and fresh sap. I was outside on my porch, pacing around with a mug of coffee, trying just to enjoy the peace. But then the hair on the back of my neck stood up again. It was that sixth sense telling me that I was not alone. Sure enough, I heard branches cracking to my left. I swung my flashlight around, catching the glimpse of a shape. It was big and hunched over, covered in sparse patchy fur, and that short hog-like snout. This time it was only about 20 feet away from me, half hidden behind a tree. When our eyes locked, I heard it grunt at me. A continuous grunt that slowly rose into a high screech, and then it did one huge stride. That thing loped towards me. I began to panic. I dropped my flashlight and sprinted off the porch, hoping I could circle back around the cabin before it made it to me. My boots slipped on the mud. I could hear the creature breathing. It was so close I could hear snarling and snapping branches, and I knew it was getting closer, closing in on me. I managed to weave between a few thick pines. The adrenaline in my body was the only thing keeping me moving. I heard heavy paw steps, if you could call them paws. They were just behind me, and I swear I could feel hot breath on my neck. I whipped around a tree, almost smashing my face into the trunk, and then I spotted my cabin's porch light in the corner of my vision. I pushed myself forward, half sliding and half running toward the door. By some miracle, I made it to the porch. I yanked the door open and hurled myself inside. My shoulders slammed into the frame, but I didn't care. I kicked the door shut with my foot and threw the bolt. Afterwards, I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. Outside, I heard that thing howl. It was awful. This deep moan that ended in a pig-like squeal. It was so close I could hear the wood on the porch creak under its weight. My entire body was shaking. I listened, heart pounding, just for a few seconds. This thing pawed and scratched at the door, and I prayed that it wouldn't break through. Then abruptly, it must have run off, because everything else went quiet except the blood hammering in my ears. But that was the last straw. I couldn't handle living in that cabin anymore. Within a week, I found a temp job in a nearby town. I made enough cash to fuel up my truck and drove away. I told my friend he could keep the last of the rent. I was done, though I don't know if he believed me about the creature. He just shook his head and said he'd look into it. I thanked him over and over for letting me live there, but I never went back to find out if he saw anything. Nowadays, life has been a whole lot kinder. I got a decent gig that pays the bills, even moved into a small apartment where I'm far from any dense forest. I have the occasional nightmare about that thing, about that night. I think that's normal for this kind of trauma, though, and honestly, it is trauma. Being pursued and nearly attacked by a large animal, something you couldn't identify on top of that, it sticks with you. I may never truly know what that thing was, but I learned that we share the world with things we don't fully understand. Some things want to eat you, or at least drag you through the hills, and do God knows what with you. So stay safe out there. The Ozarks are very, very big, and there's a lot of questions that we have about them that haven't been answered. And obviously, there's things out there that we don't understand. The story I'm about to tell you happened when I was around 11 or 12 years old. So the year would have been either 1999 or possibly 2000. I live in central Sweden. My parents had been divorced for many years, and the day of my encounter, my younger sister and I were visiting our dad at his farm. He raises slaughter pigs there for one of the country's biggest meat producers. I've always loved animals, and I enjoy helping out on the farm, feeding the animals and cuddling with the piglets. My dad had built the pig housing just a couple of years before. When you entered through the main entrance, you would find yourself at the beginning of a long corridor with 4 doors on the right side, 2 doors on the left, and 1 door at the end of the corridor leading out to the back side of the building. The first door on the right led to an office and staff room, and the second door led to a storage room. The following 2 doors on the right and the last door on the left led to what we called the pig stables. Stable numbers 1, 2, and 3, each with 48 separate pens where the pigs were housed. The first door on the left, when we went to the barn, were where we stored food and straw for the animals. The way this farm worked was that we'd receive pregnant sows a week or 2 before they were expected to give birth. When the piglets were old enough, the sows were sent to other farms to rest for a few months before being impregnated again. The piglets stayed with us until they were old enough to be sent off to slaughter. Now, back to the story. The day of my encounter was a very cold winter day, probably around December or January. The ground was covered in a thick layer of snow and the sky was clear. A perfect winter day. My sister and I had arrived at our dad's place around lunchtime. That afternoon, we were in the stables helping out with the chores. I remember that stable number 1 held slaughter pigs that were maybe a couple of months old. In stable number 2, we had pregnant sows expected to give birth any day, and stable number 3 was empty at the time. We had just been cleaned and prepared for a new delivery of pregnant sows to arrive within a few days. I remember my sister being so bored that day. The only thing she liked to do was cuddle and play with the newborn piglets, which we had none of at the time. My dad was in the empty stable number 3 working on a broken gate to one of the pens, which had been damaged when the slaughter pigs housed there earlier were moved. I had just fed the pigs in stable 2 when my dad told me he found one of the slaughter pigs injured. This was quite common for them to get hurt when they were in their teenage stage. They were trying to establish dominance and being eager and playful, but it was unusual for them to have serious injuries. Usually it was just scratches or bite marks. When he told me this pig probably had a broken front leg, my heart dropped, because I knew there was nothing we could do. That pig would have to be put down to end its misery. I hated that. It didn't happen often, but when it did, I always teared up. I helped my dad find the injured pig, and we carried it out through the door to the back side of the building. Out there was a big round manure tank, approximately 15 meters in diameter and several meters deep. It was partly buried in the ground, with just about a meter on the top above the ground level. We carried the pig to the other side of the tank. My dad brought a butchery bolt gun, but I refused to stay out there while he did what he had to do. I went back inside and continued feeding the pigs, listening to music and trying to get my mind off of what happened to that poor pig. After a while, my dad came in to tell me that we needed to go to his workshop to get some tools to fix the gate. He asked if I wanted to stay there or come with him. His workshop, where he stored and maintained his agricultural machines, was a 10-minute drive from the farm. He said he'd be back in half an hour, so I told him that I would just stay there. I helped him carry some tools to his car, then watched him and my sister drive away. It was mid-afternoon by then, but it was already dark outside. Now I was alone on the farm, but I didn't mind that. We lived just south of the Arctic Circle, and in the winter we only had a few hours of light. I was used to that, the short days, the darkness. The sky was clear, covered with bright stars, and the moon looked big, bright, and more beautiful than usual. I went back inside to the staff room to eat one of the sandwiches my dad had bought for us. After that, I went back to start cleaning out the pens in the stables 1 and 2. These stables had slated floors that could be opened to scrape down dung and straw, which were automatically transported out to the open manure tank on the back side. But because of the freezing temperature, I first had to go out back to start a circulation pump to keep the liquid manure from freezing in the pipes. I opened the hatch to the control panel and started the pump. When I closed the hatch, I looked across the manure tank at the pig lying there in the snow. The dim light shone through the windows from inside. mixed with the moonlight lighting up the area. The snow under the pig's head was now colored red. I actually felt a bit relieved that he was no longer in pain. I went back inside and continued cleaning the pens. After about half an hour, I'd finished the 2 stables. My dad and sister were yet to be back. So I decided to go to the staff room, grab a Coke from the refrigerator, and watch some TV until they got back. I felt I deserved a break. They'd probably be back any minute. After a few minutes of watching some boring reality show, drinking Coke, and having my second sandwich, I remembered I'd left the circulation pump running. I put down the sandwich and went out to the corridor toward the back of the door to turn it off. I opened the back door and stepped out, just about to open the hatch to the control panel, and I saw something move out of the corner of my right eye, just across the manure tank. I looked over, and immediately my heart felt like it stopped. My entire body froze with fear. What I saw was something I had never seen before, and I hope I will never see again. On the other side of the manure tank stood a huge animal leaning over the carcass of the pig that we'd left there earlier in the day. The animal faced away from me, so at first I could only see its back. I thought that maybe it was a brown bear, but it was much larger. It had a tail with long hair, like that of a golden retriever. The animal was covered in dark gray and black fur, with a wide, muscular body. I could see steam rising from its breath in the cold air. Suddenly, the animal stood up on its hind legs. This thing was enormous, maybe 220 to 240 centimeters tall. It turned its head slightly to the right, nose towards the sky, and opened its mouth to toss a piece of meat down its throat. The head was definitely that of a wolf, but much bigger and darker. It had long fur, pointed ears, and a snout with big canine teeth. We have both wild wolves and bears in this area, but this was something else. Something bigger and stronger. Something that gave off an evil vibe. The animal leaned down again, continuing to feast on its meal. I realized it hadn't yet noticed me standing there outside the door. I was so scared I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or faint. My body was literally frozen, and not from the cold temperature. Finally, I found the strength to silently walk backward inside and softly close and lock the door. Even inside, I tried to move as quietly as possible through the corridor and lock the front door as well. I didn't want to give that monster out there any chance to get in. I walked over to the door to the stable number 2, which had windows facing the backside where that creature had been. I looked through the door. The windows in that wall were about 2 meters up from the floor, so I could only see the steam from its breath rising outside, but I knew that it was still there. Suddenly, though, some of the pigs saw me through the door window and started grunting loudly, and soon all of them were grunting. They always did that when they saw a person at the door. They were excited and hoping that I was bringing them food. I looked back to the windows just in time to see the creature stand up and turn toward the sound of the pigs. I could only see the top of its head and its ears as it walked up to the window. I sat down on the floor quickly in front of the door and cried silently. This thing was tall, and it was walking on 2 legs. I started crawling on the floor back to the staff room to get the phone and call my dad. You have to remember, this was around the year 2000, when a 12-year-old didn't have a mobile phone. I reached the door and realized there were 2 big windows in the staff room with no curtains or blinds, so I didn't dare go in. It was risking the creature seeing me from the front side of the building if I did. I sat down in the corner between the doors to the staff room and the front door. At that point, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I began to cry like never before. I was sure that monster, that werewolf, would get inside. It would hear me crying and find me. Suddenly, the handle on the front door turned violently. Something tried to push the door open. I screamed. The handle turned again, followed by 2 loud thuds. Something trying to break the door open, it felt like. I was sure I was going to die in that moment. Then the handle turned once more, and I heard hard knocking, followed by my dad's voice calling out for me. I rushed up, unlocking and opening the door, telling my dad and sister to hurry inside and lock it behind them. When I turned to my dad, he saw that I had been crying and asked what was wrong. I told him everything. About the werewolf, about it eating the pig, and he looked at me without a word, then at my sister. He looked back at me and asked if I was done feeding and cleaning the pens. I nodded. He nodded back thoughtfully, looked down at the floor for a few seconds, then told us the rest of the work can wait until tomorrow. Then he took us back home. That evening, he went by himself to give the pigs their evening meal. My sister and I watched from the upper floor of the house as he walked across the yard, hoping that creature wasn't hiding in the dark ready to attack him. I remember him scanning the area with a flashlight and his rifle as he walked. When he came back, I asked if he'd seen the dead pig out back. He said he had, or rather, what was left of it. He said it looked as if some predator had found it and dragged the rest of it into the forest. After that incident, my dad was very clear. We were not allowed to go outside after dark. As I got older, I thought a lot about that day, and about my dad, how he reacted after I told him what had happened, followed by those new strict rules about never going outside after dark. Did he know this creature existed? Did he know it lurked in the forest surrounding the farm? Had he seen it himself? My dad later passed away from leukemia some years later, before I ever had a chance to ask him about it though, but I'm sure he knew something about the creature that I saw that day. I never thought I'd be faced with my mortality and my belief system in such quick succession. We lived in Mayville, Michigan, in a very, very small town. I mean, one stoplight and a banker kind of small town. It's also surrounded on all sides by forest and farmland. I was a teenager, and jobs were scarce for a 16-year-old with no car. My dad's friend ran a big dairy farm on the outskirts of town. He was willing to pick me up, so I was good to go. It was hard, back-breaking, and at times nasty work. Ever been peed and crapped on by a cow? I have. More times than I care to admit. Part of the job was checking the fence line and making sure there was no breaks in the fence. It was an electric fence, and I found that out the hard way. Anyway, I'd been working at the farm for a few months, and I started to enjoy it. I felt I had earned a certain amount of respect from my bosses. I was the youngest person working there, and the only one willing to walk the fence line alone. We live in mid-Michigan. There's no bears or any large predators, so I didn't get why the other guys were acting like a bunch of chickens every time I got ready to go out. The guys would look like they were getting ready to lift and carry my coffin when I prepared. We started to have a few issues around the farm, though. Things like missing cats and some cows stopped producing milk. I guess stress can do that. Then a few times, the urine smell coming from the northwest corner of the pasture was horrendous. Like, make your eyes water and dry heave bad. The owner actually made me put bleach and water into a weed spray bottle and go to town near the fence line that night. But it seemed after me spraying the bleach, things got weird. The farmer told us he kept hearing horrible screaming and growling sounds. Now what you have to understand is the boss and the farmer are two different people. The farmer was an 82-year-old man who lived on and owned the property. The boss was his son, maybe 45 years old. The farmer didn't go out to investigate. Like he said, the old gray mare ain't what she used to be. In other words, he was too old and not in great health. We all looked around the property for signs of damage, or really signs of anything. This time, we went out as a group. Myself and Perkins, the other teenager, were of course walking towards the northwest corner, and the smell got worse. Oh my goodness, was it worse. It also had a crap smell, and that section was really torn up. There was urine and crap everywhere, claw marks on the fence posts and broken limbs on trees. It looked like something had thrown a massive hissy fit or something, like a spoiled kid that didn't get their own way. We got everyone over to our area. Everyone just stood there. All the older guys grabbed their handkerchiefs out of their back pockets and held them over their noses and mouths. Everyone seemed to be speechless. The boss finally said, "Come on guys, let's get back. You four go get whatever you need to get this cleaned up." After all the damage had been done, the fence was not busted, which was a good thing. The boss insisted it was a pack of feral dogs. It had to be, he said. We were cleaning up messes from that general area for about a week. The next day, when I was picked up, no one was talking in the car. I looked at Perkins with the what the heck look. He just shrugged. Well, I didn't want to be the one breaking the odd, cold silence, so on to work we went, but it was very uncomfortable. When we arrived, the truck from the local slaughterhouse was there. 7 of the cows were brutalized. Not eaten at all, just killed. The night before, the farmer had heard the commotion and grabbed his shotgun. He let out a round off the front door, and this huge floodlight kicked on. Some massive thing stepped out of the barn and into the light. The farmer said it was wider than any man he'd ever seen, and taller to boot. Covered in dark hair, and the eyes were a mix of blood red and yellow. He said he could tell without a shadow of a doubt this thing was extremely angry. He inhaled in shock and slowly backed up into the house. He shut and locked his door. He said the thing watched him for a few minutes and then turned, let out this annoyed huff, and walked off at a normal pace into the woods. The farmer then called his son, who raced over. He, of course, told his dad, "Your eyes aren't the best anymore. It had to have been a man in a large coat." But the farmer was livid. He said, "Name me 3 times I've had any vision problems. I still drive. I got a better record of driving than you boys here. I know what I saw, and it weren't no man in a large coat, unless that man had pointed ears on his head and looked like a wolf." Of course the son just said, "Okay, Dad, we'll handle it. This man saw a damn movie monster, and we were the ones that were going to handle it? Come on." The boss covered us up and told us how much money just drove off in that truck. You can't sell that meat, so it's only for personal use. He told us no matter what it was, it had to be taken care of tonight. Since he was my ride home and I wasn't about to walk, since the road is in the middle of the woods, I figured screw it. At least this way, I've got a gun and backup. The day went on. We did our normal chores, but we had to clean on the run. I have never, to this day, seen anything so horrible. These were cows that were killed, not humanely slaughtered. All of the carnage had to be cleaned up by us. Just imagine water drenched in blood. The dirt floor had tons of mud, but not water-based mud, blood-based mud. The smell was like nothing I could ever imagine. It was mixed with the copper smell and urine again. The guys assumed the cows probably cowered from them, which I'm sure they did, but it was the same urine smell from the fence line. Perkins mentioned that it smelled just like the original urine smell when an older guy who was just kind of watching us said, "Well, fellas, looks like we pissed off the wrong manimal." I chuckled and said, "You mean animal?" But I noticed immediately nobody else was laughing. He snapped his head at me and said, "You better shut your mouth and listen up. I know what I said. I said manimal, as in man, animal." Now, understandably, I'm very confused at this point, and even kind of slightly terrified after seeing what happened to those cows. But his tone and the feeling in the barn told me I had good reason to be scared. "It's that damn man-wolf or wolf-man, isn't it?" said some other guy from behind me. The farmer had made his way out to the barn at that point and overheard what we were talking about. "This isn't the first time I've had to deal with this," he said, "but it's the first time I've had this damn thing on my land." I just couldn't believe what I was hearing now. "So you guys are saying a werewolf did this?" I asked. "No, damn it. This thing isn't a man. Never was. It's a beast. Look at all this carnage. It was done by a monster." Now this argument went on for a bit, but I heard very little. I was busy trying to decide if I was working with insane people or honest, hard-working men who had absolutely no reason to make this up. I wasn't sure if they were serious or just trying to prank me. But regardless, we cleaned up and finished that day by checking the fence line as a group. I had so many questions but nowhere to get answers, so I just kept my mouth shut. There was no internet available. The library in Mayville was a joke. I had 2 days to figure it all out. Okay, one day. I screwed around most of the weekend. I don't think I actually wanted to face this. But Sunday came and I decided to talk to my old man. The people I was working for were my dad's friends. Friends for a lifetime. He listened to my story and he insisted, "Son, those things have been around here and most of the dense forest of Michigan for lots of years." "I'm sorry. What?" I asked. "Look, if the farmer says that's what happened and what he saw, that's all there is to it." I guess I wasn't thinking in my dad's mindset. These men didn't seek fame or money from these happenings. They actually hid them most of the time. As an adult, I now see my dad's point of view. These farmers had no cause to make up these stories or fake attacks like what happened at my job. They lost thousands of dollars when those cows were torn up. But I still thought like a kid back then, and decided it was all a bunch of horse shit. It was just an animal doing all of this. So I went back to work Monday with a new, cocky attitude. I wasn't going to be scared off my job by this crap. But at work, the atmosphere was tense, to say the least. I didn't care anymore, though. I was convinced it was some big predator in the woods, and the old boys were just messing with me. 9 p.m. came, August 15th, a date I'll never forget. Perkins and I said we'd check the fence line. I had picked up a habit of stupidity, because if you smoked, you could get away with an extra break or two. I realize now that it was stupid, but I was 16 and, well, yeah, stupid. So I went out there with a cigarette, sparked it up, and was smoking with Perkins as we walked around. We noticed the fence that was reinforced with heavy-duty barbed wire now. We joked about how the boss probably had a massive fit when he had to pay for that. It was done over the weekend. Us teens didn't work the weekends, so he had to pay the big boys to install it, and I'm sure it cost a pretty penny. We were heading out, passing the northwest corner of the pasture, when we were slapped in the face with the foulest odor I've ever smelled, even to this day. It was wet, rotted dog with a stinky hot copper smell. Perkins actually started dry heaving, and my eyes were watering like I tried to wipe my eyes with onion slices. It was about 8:30, so twilight was setting in. After Perkins finally composed himself a bit, we were both cussing up a storm, and then all of a sudden, we heard what to me sounded like a bull snorting. There's bulls on the property, sure, but none on the outside of the fence, and this sounded like it was in a tree. We started backing away slowly as I got my flashlight out. I knew exactly where to point it. I just wasn't sure I wanted to. I chose to turn it on at the base of the tree and move it up slowly. Why I did that, I don't know, because what I saw changed my life forever. About 4 feet up the tree were the branches that formed a Y shape, and in that Y shape was a massive, furry dog. It was crouched in the dip of the Y, and it was resting its limbs on the branches that made the upper part of the Y, and it was just looking at us, teeth bared, growling. Perkins started making very bizarre squeaking sounds when he saw this creature, which startled me, but also snapped me back to reality. And reality was pretty shitty at that point. I reached up to grab my rifle. It was strapped over my shoulder. The thing dropped down to the ground, landing on its hind legs, and then began to rise up. Now, I'm 6'2", and this thing was much, much taller than me. And there's also the fact that it was standing up on 2 legs. It crouched down low, took a "I'm going to attack you" stance like it was getting ready to sprint, and then it lunged forward. I shot at the same time. I thank God every day that heavy-duty barbed wire was there. That thing got caught up in a bunch of wire that had been left behind to finish the fence. It screamed and howled and growled so loud that the guys standing by the trucks waiting for us heard it, and they started coming to our area. Some were running on foot, some were driving over in the trucks. Now this thing, this werewolf or whatever you want to call it, it was thrashing and screaming for what felt like 10 minutes, but in reality, probably only lasted 30 seconds. The truck carrying my boss and the older guys got to us just in time to see that damn thing stand up and bolt. We just stared toward the dark area that it ran off into, all of us in pure shock. I decided after all these years I could handle it. I not only handled it, I got excited. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people like me out there. After 2 years of listening to everything I could find on Dogman, I stumbled across Dead Man Talking and a woman named Alicia, who was close to my age at the time of her encounter. Also, within 20 miles of my own encounter. They were the first ones I told my story to. All I want you people to know is, these dogmen, they're real, they're flesh and blood, and they don't like you messing with their territory. Stay safe in the woods of Michigan, folks. Or do as I do now and stay out of the woods altogether. Regards, Anonymous. I would like to share a friend's story with you. As you know, a lot of people do not wish to relive nightmares, so she agreed to tell me so I could in turn share it with you. Her encounters had been going on for months and just abruptly stopped this past year. These occurrences started out as once a week, then escalated to an every night thing, and that went for weeks on end. Tammy is what we'll refer to her as, though this isn't her real name. She has 2 acres of land in northeastern Indiana, approximately 30 miles from the Ohio border. She had purchased the land and had a modular home put on it as a retirement gift to herself and her pets. At one time, she had 12 cats and 2 dogs, but by the time I visited her and learned this story, she had only 2 dogs and 3 cats left. As she started to weep, she told me the story of a nightly visitor and how animals had just disappeared around her place. To describe the layout of the property, her home is set a quarter mile off the main road. She has a long dirt driveway that curves around a large group of pines. Behind the home are miles of wilderness with game trails that start at her backyard and go into the forest hundreds of yards. Back to the right of her home are some more pines, a few maples and oak trees, and beyond that is a fence line separating her neighbor's farm. To the left of her home were a few trees, and beyond that is open grassland for about 200 yards, then nothing but forest. Tammy stated the visit started last summer, and didn't stop until just before Thanksgiving. This was approximately 4 or 5 months of activity. One summer afternoon, Tammy had her son come over to cut her lawn. There was a small tool shed behind her home, just outside the wood line. Her son was walking to the shed when she said he yelled. A few seconds later, he burst through the back door. She said he was pale and sweating profusely. She thought he'd been stung by a bee, which he was allergic to. She told him to sit down and relax and ask him if he'd been stung. He told her no, that it had been something standing beside the shed. She asked him what he saw. He told her he wasn't sure, but it looked just like a werewolf. She then assumed he was stung and exaggerating or was delusional, and he drank down a whole bottle of water that she'd given him. He assured her that he wasn't stung and that he did see something. He told her to go look for herself. She then went out to the back window and stated that she did see something, but it was just the back of that something, going back into the woods. It looked like it was carrying a small animal in its hands. So she asked her son, "What in the hell is that?" His reply was, "I told you, Mom. It was a werewolf." She said she didn't know what to make of it. Then her son told her he was not going back out there, and wasn't going anywhere near the woods. Tammy told her son it was okay and to relax and that she'd have a local company come out and cut the grass. He told her, "You need to tell whoever's coming out about that thing back there." She said she told him it had to be a bear. She said it just had to be, nothing more. She said she'd convinced herself that that's what it was, because werewolves don't exist. She stated to me she did not believe in Sasquatch or werewolves. I asked her if that may have been what she'd seen, but again she said no, it was not one of those. And then she got quiet, and she said, "My son, he was right. I'll tell you what I did see, and it didn't look like a Sasquatch." The next morning, she contacted a local lawn maintenance company, and they came out later that afternoon. As they were cutting the lawn, one of the men knocked on the door and asked her if she was missing a cat. She said she didn't know. She had many cats, and all of them were outdoors to keep the mice population down. He then told her it looked like a coyote had got one of their animals, and they found it in the tree line behind the house. She went out to see. What she saw next was a gruesome sight. One of her cats, or what was left of one, had been torn apart. She knew that it couldn't have been one of her dogs that did it. They were way too small and were afraid of cats, so she assumed it was a coyote. The next weekend, Tammy said she was laying in bed when she heard scratching on the back door. She said she got up and looked out the bedroom window, but didn't see anything. She leaves the back porch light on so the cats can see the bowl of food that she leaves on the porch. She said she could see the bowl and there was nothing there, so she went back to lie down. A few minutes later, more scratching, followed by what seemed to be the cats screeching as if they were fighting, which only lasted a few seconds, and then there was silence. She assumed they were fighting over food and went back to sleep. The next morning, she got up and looked to see if the bowl of food was empty. She said what she saw next shook her to her core. There were 4 more of her cats scattered about the yard, all appearing to have been fed upon. She then began to tell me that after a few hours she decided to go out and bury the remains of her pets. She said her son came back over, reluctantly, but he agreed to help. They buried the animals on the side of the house, not in the backyard. She noted that he brought his sidearm. He was very apprehensive about being out there. She told him if he saw a coyote to shoot it. He said, "I told you, Mother, this was not a coyote. I told you what I saw, but you won't believe me. There's a werewolf out here." She told him to be quiet, that he shouldn't give in to such imagination. But over the next few weeks, she'd find out the hard way that her son was telling the truth. After they buried the animals, her son suggested putting the cat food under the porch, and he could place a piece of plywood up and cut a small opening big enough for just the cats to fit through. She agreed, and he put up the plywood and cut a 12 by 12 inch opening. This would make it hard for a coyote to get under the porch. A week went by. One evening, while Tammy was watching TV, she heard a loud crash. She went to the kitchen, looked out the back door, and that was when she received the shock of her life. Because there it was, the werewolf that her son had been talking about. It was standing beside the porch, with the plywood her son had put up in its hands. Tammy said she saw it clear as day. It then tossed the plywood aside, got down on all fours, and proceeded to go under the porch. Tammy said she yelled at it to go away. I asked her what she said she saw. She said, "My son was right. It was a werewolf." As tears ran down her cheek, she said she saw it. She ran to her bedroom, got her cell phone, called her son. She begged him to come over and to bring his gun. She told him it was outside and to hurry. She said her son showed up 20 minutes later with his friend and her daughter-in-law. As she hung up the phone, she heard scratching on the back door that lasted just until her son showed up, and then it stopped. As she heard car doors slam, Tammy stated that she was frantic. Her daughter-in-law told her to pack a bag, that she was staying with them. The son's friend wanted to go back out to see what had happened. Tammy's son told him not to, that they'd look in the morning. As they went to leave, her son froze and asked if anyone else felt that. Tammy said yes. I asked her what it was that they felt, and she said, a chill of fear. They hurried into the car after that and left, all four of them now unnerved. As soon as they pulled out of the driveway, that fear left. They discussed going to the sheriff, but the son and daughter-in-law said she'd be labeled crazy. Tammy said dogs and coyotes can't walk on two legs, that what they saw was real, and they need to warn people. Because if her son's right, there really is something that looks a lot like a werewolf stalking the woods out on their property. The next morning, around 10 a.m., they returned. The plywood was 30 feet from the porch. The son and friend looked under the porch and gagged. The stench was overwhelming. They told Tammy to go inside. She didn't have to look. She knew more of her animals were under there. Tammy went inside, but couldn't find her dogs. They always greeted her, but they weren't there. She found them under the bed, shaking in fear, soaked in urine. It took treats to coax them out. Tammy rounded up all the remaining pets and brought them inside. The next evening, she was laying in bed, and it happened again. She turned toward her bedroom window and saw a huge shadow behind the shades, standing still as a statue. She said you could see its pointy ears. Both dogs whimpered at the foot of her bed. She shut her eyes tight and prayed. When she opened them, it was gone. She asked me if I believed in the power of prayer. I told her, yes, I do. She asked me if these things were evil. I said yes, but I didn't believe they were spiritual in nature. I said we don't know how these creatures came to be. I asked how many more times it came back. She said for a couple more months, scratching on the windows, scratching on the doors. There were shadows that would pass the windows. I asked if she saw it directly again. She said once. She was getting out of the shower, and it was looking at her through the bathroom window. I asked her what she did. She told me that she ran to her bedroom and prayed. She believes prayer drove it away. I asked if maybe it moved on when the food source ran out. She said maybe, but prayer is a powerful weapon against evil. I asked her if anything had happened since November. Nothing, she said, and she hopes it never comes back. Regards, Dawn.